All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for saying hello in the chat box. Nice to see you virtually. Today, we have a very special presentation, and thank you to MeTEOR for sponsoring it. I am chairman at the nonprofit Center for College and Career Readiness. I also work closely with MeTEOR and am co-author of a new book called Whole: What Teachers Need to Help Students Thrive. And today, we're going to be talking about the intersection of healthy classrooms and effective learning as we look at how those things can live inside of the CDC guidelines as we think about our new normal. We are joined today by Dr. Paige Dettmann, my colleague in crime. We have been hearkening back to the good old days in Sarasota, and we'll be talking about some of the things that Paige did there. And also Russ Nagel. Russ Nagel is the SVP of Global Operations at MeTEOR Education. Today, we want to do a few things. We want to do a review of the research, looking at that intersection of learning and collaboration, while reviewing the CDC guidelines and asking how does really effective learning live inside of those guidelines. Paige and Russ are then going to take us into some specifically physically distanced designs to give us some idea of some actual solutions to the challenges facing schools today in those solution sets. And then we will talk about some specific next steps. So at the center, we've been involved in a number of research projects since schools have closed. One of our first questions was really looking at what the likely instructional priorities needed to be as we reopened. We've also been asking ourselves, as the various recommendations have come out, what are the instructional impacts of some of those ideas? And today, as one of the follow-ups, you'll get a little white paper. You'll also get a variety of pieces of research that relate to those questions. And then we want to know, okay, what are the solutions that we could actually implement at that intersection of effective instruction and physically distant classrooms? So first of all, I want to talk to you a little bit about a piece of research. It's gotten quite a lot of press. It's actually coming out in the New York Times. The impact of social closures on student learning. And what we did is the Successful Practices Network and the Center for College and Career Readiness looked at the data from 1.6 million students in real time using the Achieve 3000 database, Wednesday, March 11th to April 30th. So this is actually our only data looking at the actual experience of our students since closure. And this is what we found. We found, and this is the gray line on your screen, that bottom gray line, that our average kids in the classroom, if you look at where the red dotted line starts, that's where schools closed. If we assume, and this is, by the way, this is a positive assumption, if we assume that they just stayed stable, given what we would normally expect from summer slide, those students are expected to lose somewhere around 4 months of expected learning skill growth. For our students who are further behind from our average students, the achievement gap is predicted right now to actually widen by about 18%. So everyone's moving down and the gap is widening. Even students, or excuse me, even schools that had a lot of devices where students were going home, but they already had a device or whatever, 76% of all schools showed decreases on their online platforms and significantly less interaction between teachers and students. Now that research has been supported. The New York Times had this article on how to reopen America's schools. NWEA came out with a report. And actually, the graphic that you see on your screen on the right is just out. This paper, it was published by the 74. That's a group representing all of America's school kids. And this is a really interesting graphic showing the average fifth grade classroom expected this coming August will have 7 grade levels of skills in it. That means the diversity in the classrooms is increasing dramatically because of what's happening to our students right now. Now, one of the key factors that I want us to be thinking about is the factor of stress. When my co-authors and I, actually, Paige and Russ, were both a part of the collaborative of folks who helped put together this book Whole, we started 3 years ago looking at the impact of stress on teachers and kids. What we know is that in a high stress environment, we actually take in 1/2 to 1/3 the amount of information we would normally take in. 1/2 to 1/3. That take a lot more words into my ears and a lot more production of language just to keep going at where I would normally go. And we also know that in a stressful situation, we take in information at a lower than normal level. Actually, for adults, it's on average 4 grade levels below our reading or listening grade level. So stress actually leads the impact on instruction. We cannot, in this moment, where we are expecting our average students, not our struggling students, our average students to come back to us in August and September at 4 grade levels, or 4 months or 6 months below grade level, we cannot commit malpractice and allow them to slide further behind. We cannot give up on a decade of work in collaborative learning. I want to remind you, and I will send the following pieces to each of you. The piece of research on your screen are the 5 highest impact instructional elements. This is from the IES, the Institute for Educational Sciences, the 5 most impactful instructional elements for ELLs in elementary schools. And I want you to look at number 5. Ensure that teachers of English learners devote 90 minutes a week to instructional activities which pair students at different ability levels or different English language proficiencies so they work together. We know that mixed groups, collaborative learning together, will move all of our students forward, but especially those Ls in elementary. Look at this research, same also from the What Works Clearinghouse, the Institute for Educational Sciences. Teaching academic content and literacy to English learners in elementary and middle school. And over on the right, improving literacy across all students in secondary. On the right, look at number 3. Provide opportunities for extended discussion of text meaning and interpretation. These are the pieces of research from which a decade of work looking at active learning environments and collaborative environments has sprung. We need to make sure that as we're looking at the CDC guidelines, we are operating in a way that allows for that effective instruction. One of the key reasons that that collaboration is important is represented on the left side of your screen. This is a seminal study that actually came out in 1995, the Hart and Risley study. And what it found is that our students who are especially behind have a 30 million word exposure gap by the time they're 4. So they're about 1 million words in the English language. They just didn't hear as many words over and over and over. They came in language deficient. Today, our readers who are struggling, which leads to our kids who struggle in math and science and social studies, they are language deficient. We must have language-rich classrooms. And what you see on the right is one of the most successful learning environments ever designed. And it was actually designed by Dr. Paige Dettmann, who's with us today. It was designed looking at curriculum and working with Dr. Doug Fisher out of San Diego. The center helped to implement the instructional practices. This was purposefully designed interaction in the classroom. And those are real kids right there. The outcomes, a 20% increase in science and math outcomes and double the gains among girls and among striving learners, learners who were already behind. So we know how to do this, and that is big idea number 1 today, that our COVID-related response must not place our students further behind, that we must ensure that they accelerate faster. So at the end of the day, our state DOEs will provide our final guidance. As a matter of fact, just today, Virginia came out with their guidance. Florida's coming out with guidance. But most of the states are saying you need to adhere to the CDC. What does that mean? Well, I don't have time today to take you through every single piece of information or recommendation from the CDC. I have a white paper I'll send you. But the most important thing today I want you to understand is that the CDC is not giving us a list of requirements. The CDC is giving us a list of options. Because our schools are so different, you couldn't require all of our schools to do the same thing. And the language you see here is actually from the CDC website and their release. From cleaning and disinfecting classrooms, to sharing objects, to physical distancing, to using masks. They have a variety of recommendations. I want to talk about some of the ways we can live in those recommendations and have the most effective instruction possible, collaboration. We have recently invested in devices for all students, for many students, not all students all the time, but I want you please not to imagine those devices as just for students who are at home. Bringing the devices into the classroom can greatly enable a physically distanced and yet collaborating classroom for collaboration inside of the classroom. And the next 3 slides are actually from Dell Education. So Dell has been asking, one, how do we use devices for collaboration? And asking us, if our students had devices in the classroom, how do we help them then to collaborate, for instance, with students at a screen or at multiple screens around the classroom? In this diagram, first of all, you'll see one of those desks, very similar to Dr. Dettmann's desks. You see the student all the way in the back corner. That student could be collaborating with the students at the screens around the room. That's possible. I don't have to be contiguous with the other students. And by the way, all of my students could still be on Zoom or Microsoft Teams as long as they had their earphones in, and they could actually be talking with each other or talking in small groups. If you know how Zoom works, Zoom actually allows you to take and make little small groups that are working together. But sound is important, as is speech, but I can use technology to enable that kind of collaboration. Dell asks us to consider who the people are in our classroom and specifically the design for engagement. From the interactions and practices, what does active and engaged learning look like? And how do I make sure that does not stop, even in a COVID reality? And then what kinds of resources can I use? And by the way, in the CDC recommendations, one of the things that they talk about is, there's a concern that something called fomites or the virus can get on a physical piece of paper or a textbook or whatnot. And then I give that to you and you can catch the virus from me. It's why if you go to a restaurant right now in places that are opening, they don't have menus that are shared. If what I'm doing is on my device, I don't have to share it with anyone. I'm not giving it around, right? I'm keeping it together, and Paige and Russ will help us think through some other ways that I can have just my materials. Just as important as thinking about the kinds of things that enable that collaboration, the kinds of softwares we're using. So on your screen is a picture from a piece of software that's actually free. It's called Actively Learn. And with the Actively Learn software, I can actually have my students working on the same text, on the same piece of paper. They can be asking each other questions. And in this software, I can actually bring in to my digital environment almost any document on the web, because a lot of us are using free resources from the web. And my point is this: technology can create a seamless experience from living room to classroom, but it isn't just having that device, but it's what that software is on the device, okay? And by the way, if you think about our students, the students are very likely, we're talking about some split shifts where some students might be in the classroom on Mondays, other students on Tuesdays. If we see a resurgence of the virus come November, which is very likely, according to the CDC, I might have students out of school again, or some students out and some students in class. If I imagine right now that the classroom that's going to come into life in August provides for an environment where my students in the classroom are collaborating, but also collaborating with students at home, that can happen. That can happen, but again, we have to change our mind about how devices are used. Now, the following data actually comes from, on the right, the study I talked about that's already released. And from the left, you are actually the first ever folks to see that graph. And that is from a study of several thousand kids we were able to do over the last 6 weeks with the University of Kansas. And we're actually looking at what the students' experience has been learning at home. And here's one of the really interesting indicators: that teachers, for the most part, have not been nearly as involved with the students at home. The students didn't feel as connected. They didn't have as much conversation. They didn't feel as much impact from the teachers. We know that the online interface isn't as effective for that kind of collaboration. But interestingly enough, At home, when we asked our students to work on projects, to do deeper thinking, to actually work through some things that might have been a little bit more complex or require a little bit more struggle, but they had more time. They weren't pressured the way they were in the classroom. Their test scores, their actual comprehension scores went up. And I note this because I think as we consider what our classrooms look like, we want to think about the role of the teacher with the students when we get them, depending upon whatever model it is you're going to have, and then the kind of work we have them do at home. And I can connect them through that technology, but I don't think we want to have the students doing the same thing in the classroom and the same thing at home. We want to use the time most efficiently. One of the recommendations that the CDC brings forward is, of course, physical distancing. And there are a variety of things they talk about, on buses. Can you, let family groups be together, but then use every other seat? In the classroom, making sure we have kind of 6 feet between our students. I want you to consider using traffic flow way to help with physical distancing. And Dr. Dettmann's going to show you what that actually looks like. But if someone is masked, I hope you start with the teacher and not with the kids, because 90% of the communication from that student is nonverbal. Masks are also likely to bring hands to faces, especially with younger kids, increasing risk. And that's another thing that the CDC explicitly calls out. As a matter of fact, they recommend that you use masks primarily when you can't physically distance. Well, we know the teacher's going to have to come close to the student, so they need to mask them. One of the requirements, not recommendation, but requirements from the CDC is to wash your hands. And that remains one of the foundational, fundamental behaviors that we want to see. And you're going to see some designs which help us think about how we make sure that that always happens. Another of the recommendations from the CDC is about contact containment and student grouping. Now, I want to go back to that first piece of research I was talking about, where we know that mixing up groups, having, for instance, students that are, they aren't as able in language, are more proficient students, that's really great instruction. Student grouping today is seen as a possible mitigator of transmission. And that might be something you look at, and Dr. Dettmann will show you some designs thinking about that. But I just want to note that if you have your students mixing in other environments, it might not have benefit, okay? So don't do everything. You couldn't do everything that the CDC recommends. I want you to focus on those things that really provide for the maximum instruction, the maximum collaboration. Either way, you're going to have to think about air and you're going to have to think about power. Right now, there's a debate about transmission of the viruses on surfaces, but we know it's clearly airborne. So I can tell you right now that hotels and other commercial spaces are using advanced air filtering and electrostatic cleaning as a way to make sure that even when you're in a restaurant, they're always cleaning that air. And we have laws about how often the air needs to cycle out through a building. This is something we should be thinking about. And power is the gateway to collaborating in our devices. So air and power become 2 critical things on our agenda. The last idea here is that this is our Apollo 13 moment. And over time, I've actually become very good friends with Captain Jim Lovell because we've spoken together several times on the same stage. If you remember the Apollo 13 story, they were headed to the moon. They had a mechanical issue. And if you watch the movie, you'll hear this phrase, failure is not an option. But what Jim would say is that minds matter the most, that the way they got out of their problem is they had everybody collaborating to solve that problem. And to make sure that happens, because literally today, we have hundreds of people in our audience today. MeTEOR Education is sponsoring bringing small groups of people together to have small discussions, actually looking at your spaces, thinking about how in your real space, you can either rearrange or conduct classrooms in a way that is healthy, but brings forward these really powerful instructional opportunities. So Kay Bolser at MeTEOReducation.com, that's Kim Bolser. If you email her, and everyone is also going to get an invite, we'll take you into these small groups where you can have a discussion where you're not just listening to someone speak. But let's hear now from the folks who are the real masters, Dr. Paige Dettmann. She is an accredited learning environment planner, and Russ Nagel, and they're going to take us through some actual environments, and I will look at the chat box. So, Dr. Dettmann, Russ, it's all yours.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. This afternoon, we want to share with you about physically distancing and socially collaborating. As Kevin just shared with research, the physical learning environment and student learning experiences are intertwined. Certainly, a floor plan can enable or impair student interaction and thus impair or enable the process of learning. And while students do need think time, they very definitely need in-person teacher and peer interaction time to produce their language with peers. What is so interesting is that students tell us peer interaction improves their understanding of content. It helps them better engage in learning experiences. And most importantly, that peer interaction and that collaborative inquiry makes learning more fun, which is that emotional connection to content. Considering all of this information, we at MeTEOR have developed criteria to guide our rearrangement of learning spaces. We call these educational adequacy criteria for learning spaces during COVID-19. And Russ, my colleague, is going to talk about this first set of criteria.
So when you look at the chart here, you can see that the very first thing is safety. And given what we're going through with COVID right now, I think that the primary focus is the physical safety of our children, and that's understandable. But the social and the emotional safety are also absolutely critical. If we had more time, Paige would probably tell you quite a bit more about the social brain of a teenager and our students today and their emotional well-being and how important having that connection is. And we want to make sure that those aspects of safety are something that we talk about today. And some of the ways that we can work through that is through the adaptable space design. We've already seen a number of changes and recommendations and suggestions and things like that. So I think it's important to keep in mind that whatever we come up with today may not be what we need tomorrow, and certainly isn't going to be what we need in 6 months and as this goes away. So having an adaptable space, having mobility and flexibility, the ability to move the children around, to change the layout, maybe have flip-top tables to gain more space in different areas. And then, of course, to have learner mobility where the students can move and they can continue to collaborate and work together. All of this leads to us being able to work in the multiple modalities, which Paige was talking about, which is you have to have collaboration. You have to have conversation. There are times when there need to be presentations as well and sharing of different devices and screens and information. So today we want to talk a lot about how we can bring all of these things together for a much more rounded and holistic approach to this versus just the physical distancing side of things. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Paige for some additional information on these.
Thanks, Russ. As Russ said, safety is a significant design principle for us. So also is learning. When we were considering our educational adequacy criteria, we really wanted to create a balance between physical safety and social and emotional safety that's so inherent in high quality learning experiences. So let's look at the integration of technology. Kevin shared us how integrating technology into learning can create a seamless environment. The other 4 criteria on this page are about creating spaces to enable student interaction. In all of the rearrangements we will show you, we have considered the value of student collaboration in pairs and pairs that comprise quads of students. While the students are sitting 6 feet apart, they are facing one another. Neuroscience of learning is really clear that our social brain thrives on peer collaboration. In fact, in John Hattie's visible learning research, he purports 2 major themes, one of which is that we accelerate student learning when we teach students to teach one another. Now, we can only teach one another when we're looking at one another, hearing voice, but more importantly, using eye gaze to see facial expressions and body gestures. These are all a part of all of our natural learning processes to develop ownership and agency of learning. So our goal today is to provide you with thought starters and to nudge thinking to consider the value of achieving opportunities in space rearrangements for teacher-student and peer-to-peer interactions. So let's begin looking at our learning environments. The one we're going to start with first is a primary classroom, K2, and we have rearranged it for 16 students. We initially were rearranging rooms with clients that requested 12 students with a certain per square foot for every student. But more recently, we've been learning that, or talking with our clients about wanting to rearrange for 16 to 20 students. So in a primary classroom, one of the key parts of instruction is the rug, so that there can be a space for kids to gather. Now, where gathering is different today, and so we are using lily pads to put 6 foot apart spaces for 4 students to sit, up to 4 students on the rug. But when you look at this design or this rearrangement, you see that we have used both desks that are contoured to bring the student into the desk, as well as tables. And in CDC guidelines, it says that we can use tables and desks and arrange them, and that we want to put 1 person per desk or table. So that's why we're showing the tables here in primary, as a lot of our primary classrooms do have tables in their original layout. So we also want to look at the way we have used the mobile storage in these designs, and the rug area. So the rug area, you'll see the little trolley that holds those soft seating pieces on the rug. And then if you look at the white rectangle on the left, the side isometric view, that is a teacher mobile instructional station that is pneumatic height and raises and lowers seamlessly to provide the opportunity for the teacher to move it into the different groups or onto the rug. So let's look next at the mobile storage. This mobile storage was in this classroom, but it was lined up on the wall. And what we have done is strategically placed it between each group of 4 students. Now, the reason for that is twofold. One, it provides a storage opportunity for the different groups of students so that they are handling their materials. But additionally, our kids in collaborative environments are used to getting up and from one group and going and talking to students in another group, so that they're sharing ideas on how they're solving problems. Well, with our CDC guidelines that say we need to have small groups that stay together and do not mix, we believe that the mobile storage placed between the groups of 4 acts as a physical reminder to our kids, oh, we're in a different world right now, so I need to remember with that storage unit there that I stay with my own group. Now, we know that mobility is really important, so we have the opportunity for kids to stand and to sit and to walk. So here's our one-way pathway that Kevin was talking about. We have a hand sanitizer in that blue box right inside the doorway. We come in the door, we go to the hand sanitizer as an automatic process. And then as we walk around the room, we go to our group and drop off in our group. And the pathway to exit the classroom is exactly the same. So Russ, let's hear some about the hand sanitizer and the products that we have in the room.
Yeah, so if you think about this, some of the things that Paige was mentioning are the mobile storage units, and you can see a couple of different options there. There's the smaller option that has storage for bigger pieces and things that might be shared, and then the individual ones that you might want to have a tub for each student so that each one has their own objects and the things that they use every day, and those can be sanitized for them. And then the lily pad and the trolley, those can be done with fabrics that are easily disinfected and cleaned. So there's a lot of ways that you can use those for the distancing, but also from a disinfecting standpoint as well. And I believe Paige mentioned, but the teacher station not only is mobile, but it's height adjustable. So it gives you that dynamic ergonomics that Paige was talking about earlier, so that depending on the teachers, what they need to do, where they need to do it, and things like that, they get full adjustability. So those are just a little bit more of the details. From a hand sanitizer standpoint, I really, there are some wall-mounted options, but again, we talk about adaptability and mobility. There's a ton of hands-free mobile options here. The one on the far left would be more applicable for an elementary school. You have the bright colors. You can put up more signage to show kids how to do it properly. And then there's a big drip pan underneath in case they miss their hands. So depending on the age of your students, which is really going to be important for all of these decisions and their capabilities and their ability to participate, These are some really great options, and you might want to put them throughout the room or in different areas where there's going to be shared surfaces, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. None of this takes the place of washing your hands. You still need to do that, but it's a great supplement to that.
Hey, Paige, Jamie is asking, what size is the room in the drawings?
Okay, we've been rearranging anywhere from 750 to 900 square feet, 950 square feet. This particular room right here is 900 square feet. As we move down to the next one, and we are looking at the number of groups we can physically distance in a collaborative format in a classroom is dependent upon the square foot. This room is 900 square foot. In this room, this is an original layout of 28 students, where 28 students need to remain in this room in this particular state. So as what we looked at this, the next slide will show that one solution that is advantageous can be tabletop dividers that are transparent, that also allow kids to communicate, especially nonverbal communication, but also verbal, and provide that physical barrier for the droplets that may be shared. So the next slide shows the pathway in and out. We've put a hand sanitizer in every room because that does help with that with lack of hand washing station. The hand sanitizer is almost as effective. And you can see the pathway around this room maintains physical distancing as the kids go to their groups. But this is a different solution because it maintains all of the original number of desks in the classroom and the eye-to-eye, knee-to-knee collaborative format, but yet provides the physical distancing required with the tabletop dividers. So Russ, talk to us about those tabletop dividers, please.
Yeah, as Paige mentioned, you know, if you can't have the physical distancing, these dividers are a really good choice. A couple things to keep in mind is, first, they really should not be permanently affixed to the tabletops or the desktops, especially with anything that's going to distress the surface there, because you probably will not need them forever. These are all clear units because, as Paige mentioned earlier, and Kevin as well, so much of the communication and the understanding is nonverbal, so that you can see eyes and faces and things like that. You can see in some of the pictures, there's different ways to do that. There's different Velcros, there's different, you know, foot type mountings and things like that. We can help you with what's going to be the best for the particular desk or service that you have. You also will see a mask on the side. This isn't an incidence where you probably may also need masks. And to Kevin's point, you may want to have that only with the teacher, but that is something just to keep in mind, especially for the older students as well.
Thank you, Russ. So we're going to look at that same classroom now and a rearrangement of the previous one with 20 students. So when we look at this, we've been able to accommodate 20 students in quads around the room in 5 different groups. So when we look at the groups on the next slide, we can see that they are, the circles define the groups. And between those groups, we have the mobile storage in the same place that as we did in the primary classroom, because that does provide that physical reminder that I'm not going to go to that other group unless we're all moving and sanitize before we move. And we have the teacher mobile height adjustable table right there in the middle, the hand sanitizer on the right. So when we look at the pathway, we have a similar pathway in and out of the classroom, with getting the kids into their tables or their desks and then out of their groups to the exterior of the hallway. All right, let's talk about a media center being rearranged. So the picture, the photo on the left, or the rendering on the left, is the original media center design, and on the right is the media center rearranged to accommodate different opportunities. For example, one of the things that we're looking at is how can we create additional classroom space? So there's a small room down there on the left of the original design, And we have rearranged that for 10 students for a small classroom, might be a special ed or ESE classroom, or a particular breakout classroom as needed for instructional purposes. There at the back is the blue, if we could go back one, there at the back of that classroom against the glass wall is the mobile teacher instructional station. And then we'll talk about the whiteboard in a little bit. So going on to the cafeteria, the main cafeteria, we have highlighted classroom areas. The one is 16 students, the one is 10. And then there are small group breakout areas where the group that stays together in the classroom has the opportunity to get some oxygen to their brain by moving to a more soft seating area. And soft seating helps with anxiety and relaxation of kids when they're working their brains. So let's look at the pathway in and out of this media center. It's a one-way in and a one-way out around the circle. The next environment we're going to look at is, Michael, the next environment is a classroom, a secondary classroom, middle school, high school, with 20 students. We've rearranged this for 20 students. And what we did in this one was left the soft seating in the classroom as one of the groups of 4. So if we look at the next slide, we will see the groups of 4 outlined with the circles. There we go. And so we have the 4 circles in the previous slide, Michael, that are are showing the groups. And notice the group in the middle, which is the soft seating group, the 2 armless chairs and 2 soft seating chairs. Now there's tablet arms for each one of those soft seating options. That is exactly the same area as is taken up by the group of 4 desks. So this could be 20 desks in this classroom, but we wanted to show the option of using the soft seating. Now, what Russ will tell you is our kids, especially in secondary, are perfectly capable of sanitizing their area if the group on the top left needs to move into the soft seating area and they switch places. We can clean and sanitize that area so that they have the opportunity for mobility and a different seating area. Now let's go look at the options we have for the physical barriers. One of the things in the purple area is a different type of teacher instructional workstation. It is one that has storage in it so that it can be mobile from classroom to classroom, or that teacher could take that instructional station into the cafeteria or the media center where we have created additional classroom space. We use the storage in the room to create that reminder barrier between a couple of groups. And then we have put whiteboards in this classroom in the green boxes. And those whiteboards are dual-sided whiteboard. So each group has access to the whiteboard to visibly reflect their thinking as they write on the whiteboard. And it's mobile, it has casters, and those casters lock so it can prevent it from moving around if we don't want it to. So Russ, tell us a little bit about these products. The walkway is very, very similar to the others. So let's look at what products we have in here.
Yeah, so you have the whiteboards here. There's a lot of different sizes. They can be anything from just write on marker board type of things to tackable to magnetic. There's a lot of different features depending on what exactly you want to do with this. And one of the things you're also going to want to keep in mind is that especially for the older students, they should be able to participate in the cleaning of this. So you're going to want to have something that disinfects the markers and things like that, the common use tools, so that between students, if someone goes up and does their collaboration, the tools that they're using, they would then wipe those down so that they were clean for the next student to come up and things like that. So in reality, the cool thing about this is that the kids can be part of this, part of their own safety, right? This is almost a learning tool and another curriculum item, if you will, of how to keep safe and how to work together with this sort of thing. So especially when you have items like this that are going to be used across groups or across different students, you're going to want to incorporate the communication of how to do that safely, because this does offer a wonderful way to collaborate, share ideas, and present. but it also offers a great opportunity for kids to learn how to work together and make sure they're practicing safety with each other as well. And then the mobile instructor station, again, that's another cool thing. You know, those can be moved around, especially as we use different spaces for different things. These particular units do have the ability to have computers and keyboards on them for projections and things like that. And then if you do need that more individual one-off device and you have chairs or soft seating or something like that, you can have a small individual table that the kids can pull up and use as they need to do that as well. And again, for something like that that would be used by an individual, you'd want to work with them that when they were done with it and they put it back, that they would take the responsibility to wipe it down and disinfect it so it was cleaned off for the next person.
Thanks, Russ. So let's look at a visual arts rearrangement. The first renderings are of the original layout for 28 students. You can see the students are in groups of 4 facing one another, and we have storage units around the room. Let's look at the rearrangement for 16 students. We have them in quads again, but there are partners. So look at the little blue circles here, these 4 blue circles. If you'll go back when those blue circles, yes, those are storage units that are at the table for the groups. So CDC guidelines talk about shared objects, and that we need to, the high touch objects like the crayons and the pencils, we need to have individual to our kids. But for supplies and equipment, we can have one group have a group of supplies or equipment to share. So as long as we sanitize between the groups. These are storage materials that have pull-out bins as well as storage for larger equipment. Now we look at the quads, and these are quads. You see the circle on top, but down on the bottom, often we have individual application, we have partner products, and then we have peer review. So we put them as 2s in a group of 4, so that if they need to collaborate in a group of 4, they can, but the partners are able to communicate very easily and to support one another on project development. All right, now we're going to look at a science lab, and the same thing applies with a science lab. Oh, did we show that this is 915 square feet, this science lab? Which is a—
You sure did.
Okay, good. Thank you, Russ. So moving on to that, the original layout, as you see on the left, had 40 students, and we have rearranged it for 16 students. One of the, we'll show the circle groups with the 16 students, and then in the next slide, we're highlighting the team-based supply mobile storage. And that is the same type of mobile storage as is in the art room that allows students in the science group to share the Bunsen burner, the beakers, the thermometers, and might each one do one part of that experiment, and then one is the recorder. So in science, we have roles, and that's the way we work together with the teams of 4 to have roles, and those roles define who holds what supplies. So going to the next slide, we have assigned each team to a sink that is built in to the environment, the 912 square foot environment. And then the teacher station at the front, this is a room that teacher station is fixed and non-mobile. So we have worked around that in the design of the environment with the furniture, as well as it shows in the next slide, the pathway in and out of the room. There are 2 doors in the room. And so we come in one room, the hand sanitizer is there, we go out the other door, and the hand sanitizer is there. Russ?
So this is just really another, this is an example of a little bit more compact, if you will, mobile storage for the art room type of thing. We showed the bigger ones that were more of the room dividers before, but this one really would work well if you needed to move that in. You could have different units like this for different classes so that there wasn't a lot of cross-contamination and people could keep that. They're really not the same for room barriers, but they really work well for individual storage.
Now, the cafeteria rearrangements have been more significant in the work that we do. On the left, you can see the original cafeteria layout has a lot, all those white top tables with the little green stools are what we see often. That original layout would seat 255 to 270 students to eat on a daily basis, rotating through the students. The rearranged cafeteria managed as 15 students with this cafeteria furniture only. In this rearrangement, we have not brought in additional overflow furniture from the classrooms. So on the next slide, we're going to walk you through what is where. The tables on the left that have the benches on each side, we rearranged on the right into 4 groups with 1 student on each bench. So we have a group of 16 students there as an additional classroom. On the next slide, we see the booths that have been rearranged into groups of 2 and 4 throughout the left side of the rearranged cafeteria. And then the white boxes are the green tables, those high top tables that the kids absolutely love. And you see them all the way around the perimeter of the original layout on the left. And our designers have clustered them in the 5 together. That maintains that 6 foot plus social distance or physical distancing, as well as there's 2 up on the top of the, they stayed there the same on the top of the rearranged classroom or the rearranged cafeteria. So we wanted to show you that this cafeteria rearrangement, we've got an additional classroom for 16 students, a larger one for 21 students, and then small groups around the edge. We even used the stage to get some of the benches in there for soft seating. So the 2 additional classrooms that we've created with the original furniture are on the left, and then there are small group areas around the perimeter of the cafeteria, and then that are all 6 feet apart, and then the stage has 2 small groups, a total of 6 students. Now let's look at the mobile instructional stations there that are in red or purple, and these are the ones that Russ just talked about, where a teacher has supplies in that storage part of the instructional station and can move it to wherever it needs to be, wherever that teacher is educating at that point in time. The pathway in and out is going to be the same for this one, as well as where we bring additional furniture in. There's one way in and out from inside the building, which is at the bottom, and the door on the top left goes to the outside. So we have a pathway that goes around the exterior on the right and pulls the stage out, up and in, and then it can also exit to the outside on the left at the top. Now we've looked at removing some of the furniture, the cafeteria furniture that is very difficult to collaborate, although our designers managed to do that, and bring in some overflow furniture. So you can see the difference on the right, where we've created, shown the possibility of creating another classroom with some of the furniture that is coming out of the classrooms to reduce student capacity. So looking here at the next slide, we have the classroom in the middle. We could have another classroom in the bottom where the internet cafe is in the green, but we wanted the opportunity to use those tables for an internet cafe along the wall. You can see all the green along the perimeter, as well as that little area using the tables and keeping the kids 6 feet apart. The stage continues to have small groups with a little bit different configuration. And then the left, we can divide that into 2 classrooms and provide more opportunity for outside learning outside of just regular classrooms. The mobile hand wash station is in the purple, and Russ is going to talk about that. And then all the way around the perimeter, we have put the hand sanitizing stations. The pathway remains the same, going in and out, putting an additional pathway on top of the internet cafe so that we don't have to walk through that process, that part of the cafe. Russ, products.
So if you look at the whiteboards, we've talked about those a little bit, the mobile instructional workstation and the laptop pull-up tables. Really, these work the same way in this particular application as they do in the other one. So we're good to go on this one.
And let me add
the hand washing. Whoops, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to add that the whiteboards that we put in the classrooms were a single size, and what we put in the cafeteria was a double size because it provides a greater width of barrier since the cafeteria is so much larger in size.
Yep.
Thanks, Russ.
Yep. In addition to the sanitizing stations, if you do want to go the extra step, there are also these hand washing. These are fully self-contained stations, and you can see from these that most of them plug in so that you actually do get hot water as well. The plus to this is that you can actually wash your hands completely with these. The downside is they do require a little bit more maintenance because you have to fill them with fresh water, and then you do have to have, typically through your custodial staff, you have to have them dumped out to get rid of the wastewater as well. But if you do have an area or a special circumstance where you would need and want to have hand washing where you don't, these are good options so that you don't have to run plumbing, extra plumbing in your school.
All right. Well, as we conclude our thought starters of environments, we want to we used the MeTEOR Education Adequacy criteria to design these classrooms for both physical safety as well as social and emotional safety. We physically distanced and kept everyone with social collaboration opportunities. And what we think is this is an opportune time to move forward with our innovative pedagogies and learning to prepare students for their futures. Instead of going backwards to straight rows with kids facing forward, we're encouraging these thought starters to think very seriously about how we can continue kids having the opportunity to engage in productive student conversations.
And as we move on through this, the adaptability is really more than the furniture. We talk a lot about physical safety. A lot of the chat room things have been about, do we need to have kids facing forward? And, you know, maybe even if that is the most physically safe thing to do, the social and the emotional toll that that's going to take on the kids and their learning it's really, you have to decide if it's worth it. And right now, more than ever, there's a lot of really great things coming out that are going to help. We actually have a line of air purification systems that you can put into classrooms that have HEPA filters that they take out 99.97% of the toxins that are in there. They have filter gauges on them so you know if they're getting full, and they even measure the quality of the air in the room. So there's that. There's also a number of things with electrostatic disinfectants now that are sprayed into rooms that are done very, very quickly that will give you the ability to clean a room more frequently than you might think and have it disinfected. So being able to adapt to the new things that are coming out and the new ways that we can do that to make sure that we're not just you know, I suppose the safest thing is you put everybody in a bubble, but you just aren't going to get the equivalent of that. So the adaptability, just keep in mind that we have to look at the entire picture of that. And then the last thing is that we have to, Michael, have inclusive relationships, right? We just don't want to give up the abilities for kids to work together. And Paige has a wonderful sentiment on relationships that she says, I think better than anybody. So rather than me not do it justice, I'll let her finish with that. And thank you all so much for your time today.
We do appreciate you joining us. Final thought, the research is clear that the environment contributes to student achievement. One of the most foundational elements of learning is building strong, positive relationships. The foundation of all learning is relationships, and that's a key to accelerating achievement.
So we're going to close up. I just have a couple of last thoughts. One, as we think about that research, please remember that the most critical things to accelerate literacy are our expectations of our students, our own self-confidence, and the student's self-confidence. And as we think about navigating a whole new world, if I make things really crazy different, it's the same way as adopting a new textbook. I don't feel confident in that behavior and in that activity. And one of the things I think is really powerful is that Dr. Dettmann and Russ and these teams of designers and educators have asked, how can we continue to have collaborative, active classrooms, but in a way that meet those physically distant requirements the requirements for sanitization, etc., using things like the way the traffic moves to keep the students safe. But please, it is about that relationship. And then the last thing, as we think about our students coming back to school, remember, they have not been in a classroom for months. Self-regulation is going to be an issue. And so we've actually worked with the folks at Rhythm. This is an app, and it actually allows our students to indicate where they are in their self-regulation. For instance, what's it like in their head today? What's their energy level, etc. And you can get that for free. We have negotiated with them to make sure, because we want to make sure that we can see into our students where they are in their life, in their social, emotional reality, so that we can also help modify those and manage those in the classroom. It is our Apollo 13 moment. Kim Bolser, Bolser at MeTEOReducation.com. You will get the white paper going through all of the CDC recommendations. You'll get the presentation. You'll get the research. You'll get a survey. Please let us know what else you want us to cover or you wish we had covered, and also an invitation to small groups. Dr. Dettmann, Russ, thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. I hope that this was helpful as we think about our coming back to fall into school, making sure that we keep up those highly impactful instructional practices.